On a single fateful night, a millionaire's life is forever changed. When his young daughter vanishes from a high-class party, her rescue by a kind-hearted, underprivileged boy is just the beginning. This simple act of bravery sets in motion a powerful, life-altering chain of events. The boy's selfless courage earns him a chance at a future he could only dream of, propelling him on a journey from humble beginnings to the top of his chosen field, medicine. Years later, their paths cross again, proving that a helping hand, given without thought of reward, can create a legacy that's worth more than any amount of money. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The city was a symphony of contradictions, and 10-year-old Leo lived right in the heart of its most discordant movement. From the chipped windowsill of his third-floor apartment, he could see the relentless rhythm of his neighborhood, the hurried footsteps of people chasing daylight hours, the faded awnings of corner stores promising cheap goods, and the ever-present hum of traffic, a distant, metallic sigh. His home was a small two-bedroom box that he shared with his mother and his little sister, Maya, a 4-year-old whirlwind of braids and laughter. The air inside was thick with the scent of his mother's endless cooking and the faint, dusty smell of old books, the only treasures he truly owned. Leo's mother, a woman with a spirit as resilient as her hands were calloused, worked 2 jobs to keep their small family afloat. Her days started before the sun and ended long after it had set, leaving Leo in charge of Maya and their miniature world. He was a boy built of quiet observation and fierce determination, his eyes seeming to absorb every detail of the world around him. While other kids his age were obsessed with video games or superhero movies, Leo's imagination was fueled by a different kind of heroism. His heroes wore white coats, not capes, and their superpower was the ability to heal. His journey into this world had started with a chance encounter at a local recycling center. Tucked beneath a pile of discarded cardboard was a box of old textbooks, waterlogged and smelling of forgotten knowledge. Among them, he found a battered anatomy book, its pages filled with intricate illustrations of the human body. He took it home, drying each page with a patient hand. The book became his Bible. He traced the pathways of the circulatory system with a pencil stub, memorized the Latin names of bones, and marveled at the complex network of nerves. His mother, seeing his fascination, had smiled and said nothing, perhaps believing it was a phase, a childish flight of fancy. But it was more than that. It was a calling. He spent his afternoons sitting on the fire escape, the anatomy book open on his lap, while Maya chased pigeons in the courtyard below. He'd use a broken magnifying glass to inspect his own skin, studying the patterns of capillaries, and then turn his gaze to the street, imagining the invisible architecture beneath the skin of the passers-by. To him, every person was a living puzzle, a complex machine that he was desperate to understand. His medical practice began small in the cramped, communal courtyard. The neighborhood kids, with their scraped knees and bumped elbows, were his first patients. He'd clean their wounds with water and a torn piece of cloth, applying a bandage made from a strip of old t-shirt. He'd even fashioned a makeshift stethoscope from a discarded toilet paper roll, placing it against a friend's chest and listening with a serious, concentrated expression. The sound of a beating heart, even muffled and distorted, was the most beautiful music he had ever heard. One afternoon, a boy named Jamal, his face streaked with tears, came to him with a splinter lodged deep in his thumb. The older kids had laughed and told him to walk it off, but Leo, with his usual calm demeanor, had brought him over to a bench. He fetched a needle from his mother's sewing kit and, with a steady hand, gently eased the splinter out. He then cleaned and bandaged the wound. The relief on Jamal's face, the simple act of helping someone feel better, solidified his purpose. It was a profound and powerful feeling. His dream wasn't about money or fame, it was about something far more fundamental. It was about the dignity of care, the quiet power of making a person whole again. He would listen to the ambulances wailing in the distance, their sirens a constant reminder of the world's needs, and feel a pang of yearning. He wanted to be the one on the other end of that siren, the one who arrived to offer solace and healing. He knew the road ahead was impossibly long. The city he lived in was a sprawling chasm, with the world of his dreams separated by miles of concrete and an invisible, yet impenetrable wall of wealth and privilege. But his heart and mind were already 1,000 miles away, in a future where he was wearing a crisp white coat, his hands steady and his mind sharp, ready to answer the call of a life in service. He spent his evenings under the dim light of a single lamp, poring over his books. When he came across a word he didn't know, he would write it down and ask his mother when she got home, no matter how tired she was. She would smile, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and worry, and explain the meaning. She knew his dreams were big, perhaps too big for their small corner of the world, but she never tried to clip his wings. He would draw diagrams of organs, sketch out the nervous system, and write his own little notes, creating a medical library on the back of old-school worksheets. He was building his own ladder, one rung at a time, to climb out of the shadow of his present and into the light of his future. The path was dark and the climb was steep, but in his mind's eye, he could already see the beacon of a hospital at the very top, and he knew he had to reach it. Julian Vance moved through the world with the confidence of a man who had not only built his own empire but had also meticulously crafted every detail of his existence. His life was a symphony of perfectly executed deals and precisely timed social engagements. From his custom-tailored suits to the sleek, minimalist design of his penthouse, every element was a testament to his success. He was a titan of finance, a man whose name appeared on the Forbes list and in the society pages with equal frequency. His wife, Eleanor, was a woman of similar stature, a brilliant architect whose projects dotted the city's skyline, each one a testament to her own ambition and artistry. They were the city's power couple, two sons in their own right, orbiting a world of opulence and influence. Their daughter Lily was the quiet star in this grand celestial dance. At 8 years old, she was a wisp of a girl with a fierce imagination and eyes the color of a summer sky. She was surrounded by every luxury imaginable, tutors for every subject, a private ballet instructor, a closet full of clothes from Parisian designers. Yet she often felt like a figurine in a pristine, climate-controlled display case. Her days were a carefully curated schedule of enrichment and learning, leaving little room for the kind of aimless exploration and simple games that children in other parts of the city took for granted. Her friends were the children of other equally busy and successful parents, their playdates often resembling miniature networking events, with their parents hovering nearby, exchanging pleasantries and business cards. The gala that evening was a prime example of their world. It was a benefit for an arts foundation, held in the city's most prestigious museum. The cavernous marble halls were aglow with soft light, illuminating priceless sculptures and canvases. A string quartet played in a corner, their music weaving through the murmur of conversation and the clinking of champagne flutes. Julian, in a perfectly fitted tuxedo, was in his element. He was surrounded by a cluster of powerful investors and philanthropists, his voice a low, confident rumble as he discussed the latest market trends and potential acquisitions. He gestured with his hands, his eyes alight with the thrill of the deal, his focus singular and absolute. Lily, on the other hand, was bored beyond measure. She had worn a beautiful white dress that her mother had picked out, but the fabric felt restrictive, and the polished floors made it impossible to run. She had played with a few of her friends for a while, a fleeting game of follow the leader, through the quieter side galleries, but they were soon called back to their parents' sides. The adult conversations were an endless sea of unintelligible words about stocks, mergers and capital, a language she neither understood nor cared to learn. Eleanor, after an hour of charming conversation and strategic networking, checked her watch with a sigh. She had a last-minute video conference scheduled with her team in Asia, a critical meeting she couldn't postpone. She approached Julian, her face apologetic. "Julian, I have to go. The meeting is in 20 minutes. I'll be back as soon as I can, but will you watch Lily for me? She's with the Smiths over there." She gestured towards a couple near a large abstract painting. Julian, still absorbed in his conversation, barely registered her words. He gave a distracted nod and a quick, "Of course, dear. We'll be fine." Eleanor gave her husband a brief kiss on the cheek, knelt to give Lily a hug, and with a final lingering look, she hurried out of the gallery. As soon as her mother was gone, Lily's boredom turned into a spark of rebellion. She saw her father's back, his focus entirely on the men in front of him, and knew she was invisible to him in that moment. A mischievous idea took root in her mind. She could sneak out. Just for a little while. Just to see what the city was like at night, outside of the gilded cage she lived in. It seemed like the greatest adventure she had ever conceived. Lily slipped away from the group, her small frame going unnoticed in the sea of well-dressed adults. She walked down a long, quiet corridor, her steps echoing on the polished stone floor until she found a side entrance. The door opened with a soft click and she was out in the cool night air. The city was a different beast from here. The museum's pristine, manicured lawns gave way to the uneven pavement of a busy street. The distant glow of the skyscrapers and the soft hum of the city seemed to beckon her forward. She began to walk, her white dress a ghostly figure against the dark backdrop of the night. She turned a corner and then another, the grand, opulent avenues gradually giving way to narrower, less-traveled streets. The well-lit facades of high-end boutiques were replaced by the dim glow of streetlights and the faded signs of older businesses. The air began to feel different, a little grittier, and the sounds of the city changed from a gentle hum to a more chaotic, vibrant symphony of distant sirens, laughing voices, and the rattling of a passing subway train. Lily, lost in the thrill of her newfound freedom, kept walking, not realizing how far she had strayed from the world she knew. She walked for what felt like hours, the unfamiliar streets a maze of adventure and discovery. But the excitement soon gave way to a growing fatigue. The city, once so exciting, now felt overwhelming. Her legs ached, her head began to feel light, and the vibrant lights started to blur. She stumbled, her small foot catching on an uneven crack in the pavement. The world tilted, a dizzying spiral of neon and shadow, and the last thing she saw was the dark silhouette of a small figure hurrying towards her before the blackness swallowed her whole. Leo was on his way home from a late-night run to the corner store for his mother, the small plastic bag with bread and milk swinging gently in his hand. His mind was miles away, consumed by the anatomical diagrams he'd been studying. He was so lost in thought, tracing the path of the optic nerve in his mind, that he almost didn't notice the small, crumpled figure on the sidewalk ahead. He stopped, his medical instincts overriding his usual caution. The form was small, almost doll-like, and shrouded in a startlingly white dress that seemed out of place in the grimy alleyway. He dropped the plastic bag, its contents thudding softly on the concrete, and hurried over. He knelt beside her, his heart hammering in his chest. A quick inspection revealed no immediate signs of blood or severe injury, but her breathing was shallow and her skin was cold. His knowledge, gleaned from a dozen discarded books and his own innate curiosity, flooded his mind. The first rule: assess the situation. He gently felt for a pulse at her neck, his small fingers surprisingly steady. The weak, fluttering beat was there, a testament to a life still clinging to consciousness. He checked her pupils using the faint glow of a distant streetlight, and noted that they were responsive. She hadn't suffered a head trauma. He didn't know what had caused her to pass out, but he knew the most important thing was to get help. His mind, trained by countless hours of independent study, went through the basic first aid steps he had memorized. He elevated her legs slightly, a rudimentary shock position, and then with trembling hands he reached for his phone. There was no signal. Panic, a cold, sharp feeling, pricked at him. He needed to call for help. He looked at the unconscious girl, her face pale and her hair a tangle of golden curls. His eyes fell on a small, sleek phone lying beside her. It was a stark contrast to his own and seemed to shimmer with an expensive alien gleam. He hesitated for only a second. He knew he had to act. He carefully picked it up, his fingers mindful of the intricate device. He knew from his reading that he shouldn't move her unnecessarily. He needed to find a way to contact her family. He flipped the phone over and on the back, a small label with a handwritten number was affixed. It read, "In case of emergency, call Dad." He dialed the number, his fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar touch screen. Meanwhile, back at the museum, Julian Vance was finally emerging from his conversation, a triumphant smile on his face. The deal was sealed, the handshake firm. He turned to find the Smiths, the couple Eleanor had mentioned, but they were not there. A prickle of unease started in his stomach. He scanned the room for Lily, his eyes darting through the crowd of laughing, gesturing people. She wasn't with her friends. A cold wave of fear washed over him, dousing the warmth of his success. "Lily?" he called out, his voice sharper than he intended. He began to walk, then to jog, his polished shoes squeaking on the marble. He searched every corner of the vast hall, his mind replaying the last moments he had seen her. Where was she? He had promised Eleanor he would watch her. A sick, hollow feeling spread through him. He ran to the front entrance, asking the ushers if they had seen her. No one had. He stormed out of the museum and onto the street, the night air offering no comfort. He pulled out his phone, his hand shaking so badly he could barely type. He dialed Eleanor, but her meeting was still in progress. He left a frantic, garbled message, his voice thick with panic, and then he started running, his meticulously crafted life unraveling around him. He raced down the street, his mind a whirlwind of worst-case scenarios, calling out Lily's name, his voice echoing in the empty night. Back in the alleyway, the phone began to ring. It was a private number. Julian, his heart in his throat, answered it, his voice a desperate command. "Who is this? What do you want?" Sir, please listen," a small, calm voice said on the other end. "I found a girl. I think she's your daughter. She's unconscious." Julian froze, the words like a physical blow. "My daughter? Where is she? Is she okay?" "I don't know, sir," Leo replied, his voice still steady despite the chaos around him. "She fainted. I called an ambulance and I've given her some basic first aid. I found your number on the back of her phone. We're on Oak Street, a block south of." Leo trailed off, unsure of the name of the nearest cross street. "Oak Street? I'll be there," Julian said, his mind a blank slate except for a single powerful instinct. He ran, a man possessed, his expensive shoes pounding the pavement, the city lights a dizzying blur around him. He ran until he was out of breath, his lungs burning, his mind replaying the boy's words over and over. Just as Julian rounded the corner, he heard the wail of a siren in the distance. The sound grew louder and louder until it screamed to a halt right beside them. Two paramedics jumped out of the ambulance, their faces serious and focused. Leo, his face pale with exhaustion and relief, pointed to the girl. "She was unconscious," he explained, his voice still shaking. "She was dizzy and then she fell." The paramedics immediately began their work, their movements quick and efficient. They checked her vital signs and one of them turned to Leo. "You did a good job, kid. You handled this perfectly. What's your name?" "Leo," he whispered, his voice cracking. At that moment, Julian arrived, panting and wild-eyed. He saw his daughter on the ground, surrounded by strangers and paramedics, and his heart clenched in a vice of terror and relief. He ran to her side, his knees buckling. "Lily. My God, Lily," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. He turned to the paramedics. "Is she all right?" he asked, his eyes wide and frantic. One of them, a kind-faced woman with a stern expression, turned to him. "She seems to be in a stable condition, but we need to get her to the hospital. This boy here, he was a real hero. He found her and called us and gave her first aid." Julian's gaze swept over the scene, finally settling on the small, quiet boy standing off to the side. He saw a boy with a serious expression and a worn t-shirt, and he was struck by the contrast. His own life was one of perfectly managed moments and calculated risks, but here, in this grimy alley, a small, unassuming boy had saved the most important thing in his world. Lily was now being carefully lifted onto a stretcher, her face still pale but her eyes now fluttering open. The paramedic turned to Julian. "Sir, we need to take her to the hospital. You can ride with us." Julian nodded, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. He looked back at Leo, a silent gesture of profound gratitude passing between them. He gestured for the boy to follow, and Leo, without a second thought, followed them into the ambulance, the city lights and the chaos of the night blurring behind them as they raced towards the hospital. The emergency room was a world away from the grimy alleyway, a sterile, humming environment of hushed voices and efficient movements. Lily was quickly wheeled into a private room, a small figure on a gurney surrounded by a whirlwind of medical professionals. The doctors and nurses moved with a quiet, practiced urgency, checking her vitals and asking Julian and Eleanor a series of rapid-fire questions. Eleanor had arrived, frantic and pale, her composure completely shattered by Julian's panicked phone call. Her relief at seeing Lily safe, albeit unconscious, was a physical thing that made her knees weak. Leo stood to the side, a silent, almost invisible presence in the chaos. He watched the doctors with a hawk-like intensity, his mind absorbing every detail, the way the nurse's fingers found the vein for N4, the calm authority in the doctor's voice as he explained her condition. He felt a different kind of validation now, seeing the professionals in action, confirming the instincts he had relied on in the alley. Julian, once he was certain Lily was out of immediate danger, finally turned his full attention to the boy who had saved his daughter. He saw the worn sneakers, the patched jeans, and the wide, intelligent eyes that had been so calm on the phone. Eleanor approached Leo first, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know what we would have done. You are an angel. What's your name?" "Leo," he said, his voice barely a whisper and used to such effusive praise. Julian placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that was both a sign of gratitude and a physical reassurance. "Leo," he said, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. "You are an incredible young man. Your mother, we must call her. She must be worried sick." As if on cue, a nurse approached Julian and handed him a phone. "Your call, sir." The boy's mother. Julian took the phone and, after a brief, tense conversation, handed it back to the nurse. He then turned to Leo. "Your mother is on her way." Leo's mother, Maria, arrived in a flurry of worry and exhaustion. She had been at home, just beginning to unwind, when the hospital's call had pierced the quiet of her evening. Her eyes, usually full of tired warmth, were now wide with fear as she took in the scene. Her son in a hospital, surrounded by wealthy strangers in an environment that was not their own. But when she saw Leo standing tall and proud, a sense of relief and quiet pride began to settle over her. She took him in her arms, holding him tight, and then she turned to Julian and Eleanor. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for taking care of my son." "No, Maria," Julian said, his voice firm but gentle. "It is we who owe you an unpayable debt. Your son, he saved our daughter. He is a hero." They spent the next few hours in the waiting room, a strange and unlikely quartet. The doctor eventually came out with the diagnosis. Lily had a minor fever combined with exhaustion and dehydration. A night on an 4 drip would do wonders. She was recovering well and was even awake and asking for her parents. As the tension finally eased, Julian and Eleanor, feeling a profound need to express their gratitude in a more meaningful way, invited Maria and Leo to dinner the following evening. Maria hesitated, her mind immediately jumping to the logistics of the invitation. Their lives were worlds apart. But Julian was insistent. "Please," he said, his voice earnest. "It would mean the world to us." The next evening, Leo and his mother arrived at the Vance penthouse, a breathtaking monument of glass and steel that seemed to touch the clouds. The doorman, in a starched uniform, greeted them with a cool, professional politeness that made Maria feel even more out of place. The elevator ride was long and silent, and when the doors opened, they were greeted by the sight of a sprawling apartment that looked more like a museum than a home. Eleanor met them at the door, her face a mask of genuine warmth and welcome. Julian, in a simple cashmere sweater, was standing by a window that looked out over the glittering cityscape. Lily, her face still a little pale but her eyes bright, ran to Leo and gave him a shy, grateful hug. "Thank you, Leo," she whispered. "You saved me." The dinner was a quiet, intimate affair, a stark contrast to the grand gala of the previous night. The conversation flowed easily, steered by Julian and Eleanor, who were curious and respectful, asking Maria about her work and her life, and marveling at Leo's knowledge and passion for medicine. Maria, in turn, found herself opening up, talking about her struggles and her hopes, her voice filled with a quiet dignity. Julian found himself truly listening for the first time in a long time, hearing a story that was a world away from his own, a story of struggle and sacrifice that put his own anxieties about market trends and business acquisitions into sharp, humbling perspective. After dinner, Julian led them to his study, a room lined with books and awards. He gestured for them to sit, and then he looked at Leo, his eyes serious. "I want to talk about your future, Leo," he began. "I know you want to be a doctor. I also know that the road to medical school is a long and difficult one, and it starts long before college. The best schools, the best tutoring, the best opportunities, they're expensive. They're a world away from where you are now." Maria's heart sank. She knew this better than anyone. It was the great, unspoken obstacle that she had tried to shield Leo from, the insurmountable wall that stood between him and his dreams. Julian continued, his voice low and sincere. "I am a man of my word, and I am a man who believes in paying his debts. Leo, you gave me back my daughter. There is nothing I can do to repay that, but I can try. I want to fund your education. Every step of the way. From now until you put that white coat on. The best schools, the best tutors, whatever you need. Consider it a down payment on a debt I can never fully repay." The silence that followed was heavy with a mix of shock, hope, and an overwhelming wave of emotion. Leo's eyes, which had always held a quiet, steady intensity, were now wide with disbelief. Maria, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, began to cry, silent, grateful tears. It was a moment of profound change, the two worlds colliding not in an alleyway of chaos, but in a room of quiet resolve and immense generosity. Julian, a man who had built his life on calculated returns, was now making the most important investment of his life, not for money or power, but for a simple, quiet debt of gratitude. He knew, with a certainty that was as strong as any market forecast, that this was the right thing to do. He looked at Leo, a boy from a different world, and saw the future, a future he was now honored to help build. The air in the Vance penthouse, once a symbol of an alien world, now felt charged with a different kind of energy. The offer, an avalanche of hope and disbelief, had left Maria and Leo speechless. Julian, sensing their awe and perhaps a flicker of apprehension, had been quick to reassure them. He explained that a team would handle everything from the school application process to the uniforms and books. The entire operation was to be a seamless, behind-the-scenes effort, designed to put their minds at ease and allow Leo to focus on what he did best: learning. Maria, her initial tears of gratitude now replaced with a quiet, determined resolve, found her voice. "Mr. Vance, we don't know how to thank you." Julian simply smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened the hard edges of his face. "The thanks, Maria, is knowing that we have done the right thing. Leo's potential is a gift. It would be a tragedy to let it go to waste." The following weeks were a whirlwind of appointments and new experiences. A personal shopper, a woman with a kind but efficient demeanor, took Leo to a high-end department store. The rows of perfectly pressed clothing and polished leather shoes were a universe away from the worn-out sneakers and hand-me-down t-shirts he was used to. He chose a few simple, well-made items, and the shopper, to her credit, respected his quiet, practical preferences. He was given a new backpack, a sleek, functional one filled with new notebooks, a calculator, and pens that glided across the paper with satisfying smoothness. But the most significant change was the school. The prestigious Northwood Preparatory Academy was a sprawling campus of ivy-covered brick buildings and manicured lawns. A grand iron gate, emblazoned with the school's crest, seemed to guard the world within from the world without. Leo's first day felt less like a beginning and more like an initiation. The other students, with their crisp uniforms and easy smiles, seemed to have been born into this environment. They spoke a different language, one of summer homes, ski trips, and college application strategies that were years away but already a source of conversation. For a boy who had spent his life navigating the rhythms of his neighborhood, the quiet, orderly halls of Northwood felt both surreal and isolating. He was a brilliant student, a fact that was immediately apparent to his teachers. He devoured textbooks, his mind a sponge for complex theories and historical facts. In his advanced biology class, he was a step ahead of everyone, his hand shooting up with a quiet confidence that belied his nervous demeanor. He understood cellular biology with an intuitive ease that astounded his instructor, Ms. Davies, a woman who had taught at the school for 30 years. "Leo," she had said to him after class, "you have a truly remarkable mind. A rare gift." The praise felt good, a warm balm against the low hum of anxiety he carried. But the social side was a different story. Lunch was the hardest part of the day. The large, bustling cafeteria was a hive of cliques and conversations he couldn't penetrate. He sat alone at a table, lost in a book, the pages a comforting shield against the noise and the stares. He heard the whispers, the questions about who he was and where he came from. He was the scholarship kid, a label that felt as heavy and visible as a brand. He never spoke about his old life, fearing it would make him even more of an outsider. He kept his head down, his focus on his studies, a silent, determined presence in a world that was not his own. Julian, true to his word, didn't disappear after the initial dinner. He made it a point to call Leo once a week. The conversations were initially awkward, a billionaire and a 10-year-old boy trying to find common ground. But Julian, with his sharp business mind, was a natural at breaking down complex concepts, and he found a way to apply this skill to their talks. He asked about Leo's classes, not just his grades but what excited him. He talked about the history of medicine and the great doctors who had changed the world. He introduced Leo to classic works of literature and philosophy, seeing them not as academic exercises but as tools for understanding the human condition, a crucial part of becoming a good doctor. These calls became a lifeline for Leo, a bridge between his two worlds. He saw Julian not just as a benefactor but as a mentor, a man who believed in him when he himself sometimes doubted. Lily was another source of light. Their bond, forged in a moment of crisis, was a unique and powerful thing. She would sometimes visit him at school, her driver dropping her off at the gate. They would walk the grounds talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her world, the relentless social calendar of her parents, the pressure to be perfect, the lonely moments in their cavernous apartment. She confided in him in a way she never had with her own friends, who seemed too caught up in their own gilded lives. In turn, Leo found himself opening up to her, sharing his fears and his struggles. He talked about the pressure to succeed, the feeling that he was carrying not just his own dreams, but the hopes of his mother and the trust of Julian Vance. Their friendship became a quiet sanctuary for both of them, a space where they could be themselves, free from the expectations of the worlds they inhabited. As the months passed, Leo's initial awkwardness began to fade. He became the quiet but respected voice in class. Students, once curious, now came to him for help with their homework. He would patiently explain concepts, his passion for the subject making him a natural teacher. He started to join the after-school science club, a small group of students who spent their afternoons building rudimentary robots and dissecting specimens. He found a sense of belonging there, a shared passion that transcended their different backgrounds. One evening, Julian took Leo to a private dinner at a sophisticated restaurant. The table was set with pristine silverware and gleaming glasses. "Leo," Julian said, his voice quiet, "I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was a small, polished stethoscope. "My father was a doctor," Julian said, a rare note of wistfulness in his voice. "He gave me this when I was a boy. He always told me that the greatest thing a man can do is help others. I want you to have it. And I want you to know that the greatest investment I have ever made is in your future. You're not just a boy from another part of town, Leo. You're a part of our family now." Leo's hand trembled as he took the stethoscope, the cool metal a symbol of his past dreams and his future. It was a promise, a tangible sign that he was no longer a boy who dreamed of becoming a doctor, but a boy who was already on his way. Years passed in a blur of textbooks, late-night study sessions, and the slow, steady rhythm of personal growth. The small, earnest boy who once navigated the sterile corridors of the Northwood Preparatory Academy was now a confident young man on the precipice of his future. Leo was in his final year of high school, a shining star at the top of his class. He had not only mastered the curriculum but had also found his voice, a quiet but powerful presence in every classroom and club. He was the captain of the debate team, his arguments built on a foundation of logic and empathy, and a co-founder of the school's successful robotics club. He had found his place not by shedding his identity but by expanding it. He was no longer just the boy who had been given a chance. He was a testament to what a chance could create. His friendship with Lily had become a constant. She was his confidant, the one person with whom he could be completely open. Their bond had evolved from a shared crisis into a deep, enduring connection. She was now a vibrant, witty young woman, poised and intelligent, but still carrying the same curious spirit from that night. They spent hours talking about their dreams, hers of a career in art history and his of a life in medicine. She was a bridge to the world of her father, a world of privilege and expectation that Leo was now learning to navigate. Julian, for his part, had become more than just a benefactor. He was a mentor, a guide, and a de facto family member. He was a constant presence in Leo's life, attending his school science fairs and debates, his eyes filled with a paternal pride that was as powerful as any financial investment. He would often take Leo to his office, a sprawling command center of screens and charts, and talk to him about the art of a deal, the psychology of negotiation, and the importance of a strong moral compass. He never spoke of repayment, only of responsibility, the responsibility of a person with great talent to do great things. One crisp autumn evening, Julian invited Leo to a small, private gala at the Museum of Modern Art. The event was for a foundation that funded medical research, a world Julian was now actively involved in, thanks to his growing interest in Leo's passion. As Julian's car pulled up to the museum, Leo felt a familiar hum of nervousness. The building, a sleek and imposing structure of glass and steel, was a far cry from the opulent classical museum of years past, but the air still felt thick with an invisible currency of power and influence. Julian, sensing his tension, put a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't an exam, Leo," he said, a rare note of warmth in his voice. "This is a chance to show them what a remarkable young man you've become. Just be yourself." Inside, the gallery was a masterpiece of curated elegance. The guests, dressed in sharp suits and designer gowns, moved through the space like a well-choreographed dance, their voices a low, cultured murmur. Julian, a natural at these events, began to introduce Leo to a series of people. He was no longer just the boy I told you about. He was Leo, who will be attending Stanford's pre-med program next year. The introductions were met with a mix of genuine interest and polite skepticism, a silent question mark hanging in the air around him. He was in the middle of a conversation with a renowned neurosurgeon when he felt a cold stare from across the room. A man in a meticulously tailored tuxedo, with a sharp, angular face and a dismissive tilt to his head, was watching him intently. He was Alexander Sterling, a major venture capitalist and a rival of Julian's. Sterling had a reputation for being ruthless, a man who saw people not as individuals, but as assets or liabilities. He was, in every sense of the word, a shark. He made his way through the crowd, his eyes never leaving Leo's face until he stood before them. "Julian," Sterling said, his voice a low, condescending purr. "I hear you've taken on a little project. A charity case, is it?" Julian's jaw tightened, but his expression remained impassive. "Alexander, this is Leo. He's not a project. He's a friend." Sterling's gaze swept over Leo, a look of thinly veiled contempt in his eyes. "A friend? A remarkable turn of events for a man of your focus. What makes this boy so special, Julian? A good story is one thing, but results are what matter in our world. You've invested a lot of time and money in a boy from the wrong side of the tracks. What, pray tell, is the return on that investment?" Leo's heart hammered against his ribs, but a quiet strength, born of years of hard work and self-belief, steadied him. He had faced down bullies and doubters before. He looked Sterling directly in the eye, his voice calm and clear. "Mr. Sterling, the return on investment you're speaking of is not in a stock or a bond. It's in the belief that everyone, regardless of their background, deserves a chance to contribute to the world. I'm not a project or an asset. I am a future doctor, a scientist, and, I hope, a person who will make a difference. The return is not in my bank account, but in the lives I hope to one day touch." Sterling was taken aback. He had expected a nervous, stuttering child, not a confident, articulate young man who met his challenge head-on. He recovered quickly, a thin, patronizing smile on his face. "Impressive. Words are cheap, boy. Let's see if you have the intelligence to back them up. Tell me, what do you know about the latest advancements in gene therapy? What's your take on the CRISPR-Cas9 system?" The questions were complex, designed to expose his lack of formal knowledge. Leo, however, had spent the last 2 years devouring every piece of medical literature he could get his hands on. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice gaining momentum and confidence with every word. He explained the mechanism of CRISPR, its ethical implications, and the potential it held for curing genetic diseases. He didn't just recite facts. He offered his own thoughtful analysis, a well-reasoned argument for the careful ethical application of the technology. He spoke with a passion that was a universe away from the cold, calculated logic of the business world. Sterling listened, his initial smirk slowly replaced by a look of grudging respect. He had met many brilliant minds in his life, but he had never met one so young, so driven, and so utterly unpretentious. When Leo finished, a hush had fallen over the small group that had gathered to listen. Sterling, for the first time in a long time, was speechless. He simply nodded, a tight, almost imperceptible gesture, and then walked away without another word. Julian clapped Leo on the shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. "You didn't just pass the test, Leo," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You aced it. You showed him that some things are worth more than any profit margin." Leo smiled, a genuine, joyful smile that reached his eyes. He looked around the room, no longer feeling like an outsider but a participant. He was a part of this world now, not because of his money but because of his character, his intelligence, and the quiet determination that had brought him to this very place. He reached into his pocket and felt the cool, smooth metal of the stethoscope Julian had given him years ago. It was a tangible reminder of a past that had led to a future more brilliant than he could have ever imagined. The transition from Northwood's manicured lawns to the sprawling, vibrant campus of Stanford University was not just a geographical shift. It was a leap into a new intellectual and social stratosphere. The campus pulsed with the energy of brilliant young minds, and Leo, once an outsider, felt a thrilling sense of belonging. The classes were intense, a fire hose of information that would have overwhelmed a lesser student, but for Leo, it was the perfect challenge. He thrived in the demanding environment, his innate curiosity and relentless work ethic allowing him to absorb complex concepts in biochemistry, organic chemistry, and cellular biology with a grace that surprised even his professors. He joined the Pre-Med Society and quickly became a respected figure, known for his insightful questions and willingness to help others. He was no longer the quiet kid. He was a leader, a natural teacher, a young man who carried himself with a quiet confidence that was hard-earned. His friendship with Lily remained a steadfast constant, an anchor in the whirlwind of his new life. She had chosen a path that was a beautiful counterpoint to his, pursuing a dual degree in art history and philosophy at a prestigious college on the East Coast. Their conversations, which now took place over video calls and text messages, were a fascinating blend of two worlds. She would tell him about the history of Renaissance art and the philosophical underpinnings of existentialism, while he would speak with passionate enthusiasm about the latest research in genetic engineering and the ethical complexities of clinical trials. Julian, ever the investor, saw their friendship as a source of immense value, a symbol of the bridges that could be built between worlds. He would still call Leo not just as a mentor but as a friend, asking for his opinion on a new health tech startup or discussing a recent medical breakthrough. During one of his winter breaks, Leo returned home to a neighborhood that felt both deeply familiar and slightly alien. He walked the same streets, visited the same corner store and spent long, quiet hours with his mother, Maria. One afternoon, while helping her sort through old photographs, she pulled a worn shoebox from the back of her closet. Inside were faded snapshots of a man Leo only vaguely remembered, his father, Marcus. He was a tall, strong man with a kind smile and hands that were thick with the calluses of hard work. Maria held a photo of him, a tender look in her eyes. "He was so proud of you, Leo," she said, her voice soft with memory. "He always knew you were meant for great things." Leo sat down beside her, the old photos spreading out like a map of a life he never fully knew. "Tell me about him, Mom," he said, his voice quiet. "The real story." Maria began to speak, her words painting a portrait of a good man caught in a hard life. Marcus had been a construction worker, a man who built homes and dreams for others, but who had never quite had the chance to build his own. "He worked so hard, Leo," she said, her voice laced with the old pain. 6, sometimes 7 days a week. It was a good paycheck, but the work, it was tough on his body. He always had a cough and he ignored the aches and pains. Said he was too busy to see a doctor. We didn't have health insurance, Leo. We couldn't afford it. She looked at her son, her eyes full of a painful truth. One day he came home from work, feeling dizzy. Said his heart was racing. I begged him to go to the hospital, but he said he was fine. He just went to bed and in the middle of the night, he had a massive heart attack. The ambulance came but it was too late. The doctors told me that years of stress and physical labor, and the lack of medical care, had taken a toll on his body. He was only 42. The words hit Leo with a profound, sobering finality. All his life, he had been told his father had passed away, but the details had been a kind of protective mystery. Now he understood. The pain of losing his father was no longer just a memory, it was a powerful, tangible reason for his ambition. He was driven to become a doctor not just for himself, but for his father, for all the people like his father who were caught in a system that prioritized profits over people, who were denied the basic human right of good health care. His dream of becoming a doctor was no longer a personal ambition. It was a quiet, powerful promise. He returned to Stanford with a renewed sense of purpose. The long nights in the library, the endless hours of studying, the intense pressure of medical school, it all became a part of a larger, more meaningful journey. He moved through the cadaver lab with a somber reverence, learning from the bodies that had been donated to science, seeing them not as objects but as a final, humbling lesson. He excelled in his clinical rotations, his empathy and compassion for patients as pronounced as his medical brilliance. He could read a person's symptoms, but he could also hear their story. He was a great listener, and he had a rare ability to put people at ease. In his final year of medical school, Julian called him with a celebratory message. "Leo," he said, his voice brimming with pride, "I just got off the phone with the dean. They've offered you a full residency at Johns Hopkins. It's one of the most prestigious programs in the country." Leo's heart swelled with a mixture of immense gratitude and quiet triumph. He was almost there. He had not just climbed the ladder of success. He had built it with his own two hands, his determination a direct result of the life his father had lived and the death that had taken him too soon. When he finally graduated from medical school, standing on the stage in his graduation cap and gown, the applause was deafening. He looked out at the sea of faces, his mother Maria in the front row, her face alight with a love and pride so deep it almost brought him to tears. And beside her, Julian Vance, his face a mask of quiet satisfaction. The boy from the impoverished streets had not just become a doctor. He had become a symbol of what was possible when talent met opportunity and when a debt of gratitude became a powerful, life-changing investment. 25 years had passed, each one adding a new layer to the man Leo had become. The earnest young man who once walked the halls of Johns Hopkins was now a preeminent cardiologist at one of the country's most respected medical centers. His name was synonymous with innovation and compassion. He had pioneered new surgical techniques and led groundbreaking research into heart disease, the very condition that had taken his father. Dr. Leo Sterling was no longer just a name in a hospital directory. He was a leader in his field, a man whose hands had saved countless lives, and whose quiet, unwavering empathy had touched countless more. He had built a life for himself that was a testament to his journey. His mother, Maria, now lived in a beautiful home he had bought for her, a peaceful sanctuary where she could finally rest and enjoy her golden years. Their bond was as strong as ever, built on a foundation of shared sacrifice and immense pride. He had, with Lily's help, kept a close but respectful relationship with Julian and Eleanor, a connection that had transformed from one of benefactor and protege into a genuine, familial affection. The years had also been kind to Julian, though the relentless pace of life had finally begun to slow down. He had semi-retired, turning the reins of his financial empire over to his most trusted executives. He and Eleanor, now grandparents to Lily's two children, spent their days traveling and enjoying the quiet life they had long postponed. But even with all his success and freedom, a subtle weariness had begun to settle in, a reminder that even the most formidable of men are subject to the same laws of biology as everyone else. The stress of decades of high-stakes decisions and sleepless nights had finally caught up to him. He had been having shortness of breath and chest pains, subtle warnings that his powerful heart, the engine of his empire, was in need of repair. Eleanor, a woman who had seen firsthand the consequences of delayed medical attention, insisted he see a specialist immediately. After a series of tests, Julian received a stark diagnosis from his doctors: a serious coronary artery blockage that would require immediate and intricate surgery. His current doctor, a well-meaning but detached physician, recommended a surgeon who was widely considered the best in the field, a doctor known not just for his technical skill but for his extraordinary outcomes in complex cases. The name the doctor gave him was Dr. Leo Sterling. The irony of the situation was not lost on Julian. The boy whose life he had saved in a figurative sense was now the man who might save his life in a very literal one. He sat in his study, a room that had once felt like a throne room, now a quiet sanctuary of memory. He looked at the old photographs on his desk, a picture of a young, fierce Julian, a photo of Lily as a child, and a small, framed photo of a younger Leo on his graduation day. The decision was not a hard one. He didn't just want a good doctor, he wanted Leo. A few days later, Julian was brought to the hospital. He was waiting in a pre-op room, a sterile, featureless space that felt like a holding cell for mortality. The door opened and Julian looked up. In the doorway stood a man in crisp blue scrubs and a white coat, a stethoscope draped around his neck. The boy Julian had met in that alleyway was now a man, his face a little older, a little wiser, but his eyes were still the same, kind, intelligent, and filled with a quiet strength. Julian felt a profound sense of awe. "Dr. Sterling," Julian said, his voice raspy with emotion. "It's good to see you, Leo." Leo stepped forward, a gentle smile on his face. "Julian, he said, using the name he had come to use with a sense of genuine affection. "It's an honor to be your doctor." Julian gestured to the chair beside his bed. Leo sat down. "Leo," Julian began, his voice low, "I've been thinking about this for a long time. Everything I did, all those years ago, it was just a way to repay a debt. And look at you now. You've paid it back 1,000 times over." Leo's eyes filled with a rare, unshed tear. "Julian," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just pay a debt. You didn't just save my life. You gave me a chance to honor the man I lost. The man who taught me about hard work and sacrifice. My father, Marcus. He was the reason I wanted to become a doctor. He died because we couldn't afford a doctor, couldn't afford health care. You didn't just pay for my education. You helped me to make sure that other people like him would have a fighting chance. That is the greatest gift you could have ever given me." Julian simply nodded, his eyes glistening. Leo, ever the doctor, now shifted to a more professional tone. He explained the procedure, the risks, and the high success rate. He spoke with a quiet authority that was both reassuring and inspiring. He answered all of Julian's questions with a patience and clarity that was born of a deep understanding of both medicine and human fear. As he finished, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his stethoscope. "This is a good one, Julian," he said, a quiet warmth in his voice. "This is the one I use every day. But the one you gave me all those years ago, that's the one that's a part of me. It's the one that led me here." He placed the instrument on Julian's chest, listening to the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart. The surgery was a complete success. The hands that had once applied basic first aid in a grimy alleyway were now the hands that had performed a life-saving operation in a state-of-the-art operating room. The boy who had dreamed of stethoscopes was now the man who used them to heal. When Julian awoke, the first face he saw was Leo's, a face that was both familiar and a powerful reminder of how far they had both come. A few days later, while Julian was recovering, Lily came to visit. She found her father not talking about his business, but about the son of the woman who used to clean his office. The story was not just about a boy and a millionaire. It was a testament to the fact that kindness, when given freely and without expectation of return, can ripple out into the world and create a legacy more valuable than any fortune. The two worlds had collided in a moment of crisis, and in that collision, a new, better world had been born. It was a world where a boy's dreams were not limited by his circumstance, and a millionaire's wealth was not the sum of his worth, but a means to a beautiful end. The debt of gratitude had been paid, not in currency, but in the most precious commodity of all, a life. And in that quiet, profound moment, Julian knew he had made the best investment of his life. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.